Welcome to Digication Scholars Conversations. I'm your host, Jeff Yan. In this episode, you will hear part 2 of my conversation with Jennifer Sparrow, Associate Dean of Academic Affairs at City University of New York's School of Professional Studies. More links and information about today's conversation can be found on Digication's Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Full episodes of Digication Scholars Conversations can be found on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. I wanted to sort of go back to one more thing, which is, aside from open educational resource, it's the credit for prior learning as well. See, open educational resource, I think we all get. You're saving students a lot of money. We're probably refocusing some of the what's important in the classroom anyway. All good. I have heard institutions that talks fondly on the concept of credit for prior learning, but they don't want to do it because it's actually bad for business in some cases. You know what I'm talking about, Jennifer? Mm-hmm. Right? Because what you are basically saying, hey, if you had 10 years of experience already, running finances for a small
yes.
like 10 small businesses, you're essentially, in the smallest of business that you're their bookkeeper. For the bigger business, you are their CFO for the last 10 years. You figured out how to do this. You're trying to get a degree in accounting.
And I'm going to make you go sit in the class.
Do we really need you to go through the process of taking the accounting 101 courses? It feels unfair. It feels not right. But for some schools, they go, no. If we don't let them do that, guess what? We just wasted a year of tuition that is revenue that we would have given up. Right? I've heard that.
But I think a different way to look at that is to look at it from the point of view of the returning adult who maybe say they have 30 credits, right? And they're coming back and they have to get to 120. So that's 90 more credits, right?
You would because you want to save those 30 credits, you would give up the 90 that you would have gotten.
Yeah, right. And so 90, you're going to take maybe 2 courses a semester if you're lucky. How many of those people are going to just give up after a semester or 2 and just say, this mountain looks impossible, I can't climb it? Right? So I think it's smarter, and beyond being smarter, it's just the right thing to do to respect the learning that, especially that adults and really that everybody brings with them, and help them receive credit for it without having to buy a textbook and spend 15 weeks and take so long to get their degree. We started the program in 2014, and this is still preliminary, but I'm looking now at like a 4-year graduation degree for our 16-17 cohort, and trying to compare, and this isn't scientific yet, but try to compare the people who have credit for prior learning versus those who don't. And the 3-year graduation rate, if I'm correct, is like 15-20% higher. Like they're really graduating.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And we've been, for the last few years, something that I do feel confident in saying is that we've been tracking the overall percentage of our undergraduates who have received some form of credit for prior learning. That's at about 15%. But when you look at our graduates, almost 30% of our graduates have received credit for prior learning. So I think they're the ones who are making it across the finish line. And it's also,
and in some sense, by the way, sorry to interrupt, but for those who are saying we're missing the initial, those 30 credits, you're also getting, people who are less engaged, so they're actually not finishing anyway. So they're missing the last 30 credits.
And then it's just a failure all around, right? We failed because the student didn't graduate, the student didn't finish what he started. Everybody feels bad. I'm a big credit for prior learning booster. And before I got so busy with all the other things, I was teaching our credit for prior learning class for a while. We still need back up for a minute. We started out working with the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning, and they offered a course that our students could take. And then they had faculty in different disciplines who could evaluate the portfolios that were submitted as credit for prior learning portfolios, because there's different ways of getting credit for prior learning: by exam, by portfolio, by having credentials that have been evaluated. And then in 2016, we started teaching the course ourselves, but we're still using the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning, still using their faculty evaluators. But then in that busy year of 2020, Kale decided they were going to sunset that program. And so then we had to figure out how we were going to be able to do our own in-house portfolio evaluation. And we've actually started using Digication ePortfolio. So the students take the course. As they're going through the course, they're learning how to they pick a syllabus and they say, okay, I already have accounting experience, so I'm going to write a portfolio and demonstrate that I already know and I already can do the learning outcomes of that accounting course. Right. So they actually write to the learning outcomes, and then they put everything in the ePortfolio. They have to upload some kind of supporting documentation or evidence for each learning outcome too. It could be a letter it could be a performance evaluation. It could be a budget. It could be any kind of work product. And then we have been training our own faculty evaluators then to use our rubric and to score the portfolios. So we've been doing that for about a year now.
That's so awesome. I'm really glad to hear that has worked out. And
it's really working out great.
Yeah, it's really great to hear that it's, being used in such innovative ways. But I want to now go back to one thing that you said, which was not only is it the smarter thing to do, which I agree with you, but it's the right thing to do. And I think that's why you get these great people around you, because you are doing the right things. And it wouldn't matter. I mean, clearly you're smart, so you figure out how to make it work anyway. But you start with, look, this is the right thing to do. There are people in the world that are in this situation where, look, they don't have, they didn't have a degree. They should get a degree. They're good enough to get a degree. They just don't see the point of doing a semester of, boring stuff that doesn't apply to them. So let's drop our ego that they must go through this, otherwise it doesn't count. And let's have them have a go at proving that. And then, we'll let them come in where they need to be. So to me, this is where I really feel like that's one of the amazing things that you and your colleagues have done at SPS, which is, obviously you're always looking out for the students, things like, open education resources, et cetera. It's all about that. Otherwise you don't have a lot of incentives. You could have passed that buck onto the students and say, look, we require this book, take it or leave it. Right.
Right. And it's more work for the profs. It's not that the work has just disappeared. It's the institution. And, we have the Office of Faculty Development, Instructional Technology, where Karen works, and, they run workshops in how to find OER resources, how to build the course. We have to stay on top of it, and go through all the links every semester to make sure nothing broke or changed. It's a lot of curation.
It's much more work than just saying, this is the text, go buy it. Right. And I think that there's something, everything that you do seems to be just very focused about, like, how am I going to make the students' experience a little bit better? And again, our original premise was schools should, that's the job of the schools. Shouldn't you be doing that all the time? But it's so easy to get stuck in the way that things have always been. And therefore you're not able to do that. Now, you had also a lot of experience with, I think you talked about general education, maybe outcome assessment as well. How has that changed over time?
The outcome assessment, I was much more really hands-on with it in when I was overseeing general education directly, which I'm not anymore. But we had a way of doing this, of bringing, this was kind of before COVID, but we would collect samples of work across different sections, create a rubric, norm the rubric, and bring faculty together for a day. And actually, we're doing quite a bit of this now remotely, to get together and, read through a set of papers and kind of double score them, and then come up with, see how we're doing. And we never, I guess a shift in the mindset is we never really thought about it to get people to think, okay, you're not grading the student. You're actually we're grading ourselves. We're grading how well did this course do in teaching the things that it's supposed to teach. So it became a really great faculty development tool, and or faculty development experience. And because our courses they're online, and courses, like one course, even if it has multiple sections, it's cloned from a parent course, right? So if I'm running 5 sections of professional writing, they all are basically the same with different instructors. So it gave us really good information plus the feedback from the profs about what needs to be changed, So everybody came together after the assessment and said, okay, we need to make these changes in the course. And so it was really that was closing the loop. It was really a great cycle of doing the assessment, kind of having findings, and then being able to act on the findings by changing the course.
And I really do think that your leadership skills comes in really handily on something like this. I think a lot of schools try to do the same thing, and maybe and literally follow the procedures, sort of step by step, but can't do it because the nuance, the sort of the devil's in the details. Like, how do you get faculty to not think of it as, hey, you're just using this as a judgment of
busy
me,
work,
right? Or sometimes it turns a lot more like into accountability. But when does the accountability of how well this class do turn into doesn't mean that my position is in the chopping block. You're going to replace me, right? So there's a lot of that I think goes into what you do. And I must say that I love the credit for prior learning thing that you do, but I must say that some of this assessment sort of experience probably bring in some aspect of that credit for prior learning too.
Absolutely. Yes.
The outcome driven, so it brings in the level of sophistication that without that, gen ed assessment experience, you might not have been has done as well to students as you are guiding them to do their own sort of assessment of themselves on these outcomes.
The other interesting connection to sort of what I would consider, kind of traditional outcomes assessment and credit for prior learning is that when we're asking, when we're basing a portfolio on the learning outcomes from a course syllabus, it's really important that the course syllabus outcomes be measurable and be something that can be demonstrated. So it kind of forces writing better learning outcomes, because if your learning outcome is, appreciate blah, 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 then you're not going to be able to assess it because you can't really assess appreciation. So like that focus on the verbs and on, in one of the sessions I went to, they talked about can-do statements, like something that you can do. Then it's not going to be the syllabus won't be a good candidate for a portfolio. And that's a shame, because the students, it's closing out the students' options just because we didn't write the syllabus so well. Although in general, we try to steer people toward exams if they want to demonstrate competency in the liberal arts, like English or history, and portfolios work better for things like computer information systems or accounting or principles of marketing, things like that, things that are more applied. I have one other thing I wanted to say about credit for prior learning that I'm really happy about is that we are now offering, we're using language exams that are online proctored exams that Brigham Young University out in Utah has. And with those, we are now able to offer language exams in 25 different languages. And this has been amazingly empowering to Russian, Lithuanian, Haitian Creole, Mandarin, I can't even think of them all right now. But so people who come in, and I think this is such a big deal at CUNY because we have so many people who come in speaking a language other than English. And we're very quick to say, oh, you need to take remedial English. You didn't pass the reading test. You didn't pass the writing test. But then we do not generally turn around and say, oh, but hey, you already can read and speak Spanish. So we're going to give you credit for that. What happens a lot of times to the person who can read and speak Spanish is that they get to take a higher level Spanish class. So I think that's, we talk a lot about equity, and that's really treating someone who's a native speaker of another language worse or more unfairly than we're treating a native speaker of English. So being able to award those credits for different languages, the students have been very, very happy about that, and we've had a lot of people
I think
take
that that's
advantage of it.
is huge. It's huge. You're able to, and by the way, there is that accountant who may not speak English well, but
Right.
might have been very competent otherwise in accounting, right? So it's not being able to speak well in English doesn't have any correlation to their accounting skills, and I think that that's it definitely rings true. Now, there's one thing that I'm very excited about when you're talking about sort of credit for prior learning. Aside from what you need to do practically to get people to build a portfolio and prove these are the kind of things that they do, or that these are the things they know, and these are the evidence of the how they know this. To an extent, I feel like that a lot of that concept can be taken out of the credit for prior learning context and be pedagogically applicable to all kinds of courses and regular, sort of assignments that one can think about. Right? It doesn't have to be about, hey, if you knew this, you just have to prove it. It could also be conceptually what can be applicable to everyday teaching and learning in courses that are not about prior learning at all. Don't you think?
Well, I don't know if you're thinking about, because this is something I've been thinking about, so I'll just say it, is about
And I'll say yes.
competency-based education, because one of the things that I found kind of frustrating about credit for prior learning is that it tends to be all or nothing, right? You have to pass the exam, or you have to, pass all the learning, you have to satisfy all the learning outcomes on a syllabus. But there are a lot of people who come in, maybe who, if you're looking at a 15-week course, or say you're looking at 7 learning outcomes, what if somebody is very competent and able to satisfy, already knows 5 of the learning outcomes, but just doesn't know 2 of them? So
Right.
I'm really interested in competency-based education that would let people work through a course at their own pace, with support, with help when they need it, but the ability to be able to kind of go more quickly where you feel confident and things, and then slow down and take your time and have more resources for the parts that you still have to learn. I think that is another really promising direction for us to go, because I'm more and more, I'm kind of questioning why 15 weeks, or why this structure, why is it so rigid?
The lumping of these things sometimes doesn't make perfect sense. It's convenient from a scheduling standpoint. At some point, somebody will figure out logistics, and those are the logistically what seem to have made sense. And like you were saying before, now we have the ability to do asynchronous, learning, the high flex kind of model. And why are we still sticking with this sort of lumping of things that may not have been naturally even doesn't have to be a fit. They were just kind of conveniently put together at some point. And why aren't we rethinking? I think that's a very legitimate way to consider. I also think that I must say that there's one aspect of, I am generally a fan of the competency-based sort of approach. I'm also weary about one aspect of it that I've had a difficult time reconciling, and I'll tell you what. Maybe you know because you're smart. I when I when I was uh, years ago, when I was teaching at Rhode Island School of Design, which is where I started, teaching and developing Digication.
Yeah.
Um, One of the things that was a bit of a weird sort of model and bit of a weird culture at our school was that in some cases we don't really have a set learning outcomes for everyone in the class. And if I will give you the example here, and that would be if you had Picasso in your class, he decided to go through a blue period, he would totally flunk any color theory courses completely, right? Is that true? I mean, is that good? Right? So our point really was a little bit about this idea that as professors, as people that might be even thinking about the curriculum in very deep and hopefully would come in with a lot of experience, there's still this sort of sense of, are we the official sort of guide to, in order to be called, good at being a painter, you must know these, 8 things. And if you're competent in all these things, now you're a painter. But if you're competent in 7 things, you're not a painter. And what if you happen to be, that really, 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 really good at the second and the third thing? The other things are all sort of average or maybe not even up to par. Can you still be called a painter? Um, and I think that there is always that argument of, well, you don't want a doctor to not being able to only be able to kind of do surgery. You kind of want them to completely be able to do surgery. And I get that. But I don't think that it's right to always use that doctor's, sort of
Right.
model for everything. So I don't know. I mean, to me, I feel like that there's got to be some interesting push and pull on even what constitutes like being the official set of competency, and I would
Right.
really can get behind that. I feel
Because it's kind of arbitrary. And so, I mean, not
it
in
is
all disciplines, right? Like not
right,
maybe in medicine or in something very technical, but other
right.
times it is. And I have thought about this. I mean, I spent my whole career at CUNY. So I don't really know other schools. And I guess a piece of this that worries me is that our public institutions or places like CUNY being kind of put under more of a microscope about, you have to have learning outcomes and you have to demonstrate that the students have mastered these learning outcomes before they move on. Is that a way of that CUNY has to do that or we have to do that at public institutions because there's a question about whether our students are
There's
really good
because we
enough?
don't want you to just willy-nilly say, all right, you
Right.
don't have to do this, you can't do this, and you get a degree no matter.
Right. And I remember
Right.
going to an assessment conference once and listening. I'm not going to name the college, but listening to how the president of the college was talking about, oh, well, this is how we do assessment at my, $80,000 a year private school that's very highly ranked. And I was shocked because it was so, students just wrote something and then the professors sort of, it was very not what I would call not what I'm used to with assessment. It was much more free form. And I
Right.
thought, wow, that's really the difference between the people who got into her college are already almost prejudged as being competent. And the people who go to my college
Interesting.
are being
You
held
have to earn it. You have to prove
yeah,
it. You
yeah,
have to
prove
show
it. Right. And so,
it.
and that's something that makes me feel very uncomfortable and sad about.
Yeah, it's a lot to try to figure out. And I will say that, when we were, sort of thinking about that for our own experience at the school, and I was teaching there, I taught there for a number of years, and what seems to have been evident for us, I mean, our students were very, very dedicated and they just work incredibly hard. So for us, there is almost like no wrong approach. We don't need
Mhm.
everyone to know how to do everything, but it was more of if that's where you want to go, you better take it to a really rigorous level. So the rigor in which
Mhm.
the level of rigor that they reach in that chosen interests of theirs. So if you want to do blue, fine, but
It's got
we
to be
better
really
do
good.
500 blue paintings, so that you really become the world's, sort of, expert at blue. But here's the deal for us is that we think that that's good because we think that actually, like, that's really one of those situations where we felt like there are too many things in the world to try to focus. If you were actually try to learn everything, in fact, you're not going to be rigorous in any of them. You are just kind of be like, I've touched on this a little bit.
And you could be
But
shutting off some really great thing from
right, right.
consideration.
So for us, it was about like, if you're gonna spend time on this and be really good at it, one of the value is that you've now had experience at being the best in the world at this one thing. Just like I know I've heard like people that would go, they would hire, people who had been Navy SEALs or Olympians, not because, sometimes they're like, yeah, that, but I understand that this person is going to get things done, not because of all of this, yes, the discipline and all of that, but also because they've had the experience going from a novice all the way to the best, well, one of the very
Yeah.
best in the world. And that is a learning journey that you can't discount, because having had that experience means that if they want to learn something new, they're going to figure out a path to be able to do that. Whereas if you've never had that experience, you would sort of like flat out, like you get plateaued at some level because you don't know how to push yourself through to that next level. So that's kind of a little bit of
Interesting.
how we had thought. So we would, and I, by the way, I do think that you can sort of, if that was the case, you can readjust the competencies, right? In a competency-based, environment, you can
Mm-hmm.
readjust the competency so that the competency is not about the subject matter as much as it's about the experience of
The
being able to learn
process, the
something in the process.
experience. Yeah.
And that suddenly turns that competency-based piece to be something really interesting.
I like that. Right. Thank you.
No, please don't thank me. You're having me
Thank you
think
for that
through this
idea.
too. It's that's why we're having a conversation. And um, I know that you have to run pretty soon, Jennifer. But any sort of closing thoughts? I know that, I mean, maybe we need to just have another session with you another time, but I know that there's a lot of things that's happening, in higher education. I mean, you talked a little bit about equity. We talked about obviously COVID, what happened, and the change of modality and the different shifts in, models of all kinds of things, from, curriculum to, 15 weeks versus, something else. Um, are there other things that you want to, sort of close us out with? Some thoughts and some ideas of what comes to mind as being, pressing in the world of higher education at SPS?
I guess, well, I don't want to close on a depressing note, but I think the other piece, and this fits in with what we've been talking about why 15 weeks and why this and why that is the general need for higher ed to become more nimble and flexible and able to change more quickly. I think I've been doing a lot of work on kind of non-credit to credit pathways. This is credit for prior learning, but looking at training that's done by boot camps and different tech providers, like Perscolis, Empower, some of the that serve opportunity youth in the area. And they're working really closely with industry, and they're changing their curriculum up, and they're making sure that their graduates have got, the most current skills and knowledge. And I sometimes despair at kind of the slow pace of curricular change in higher ed. And I worry that if we don't kind of figure out how to become more flexible and responsive, we're going to, be replaced in some cases by these alternative providers that are doing a fantastic job.
I think that's really a good observation, and I think that there is something. I think you're absolutely right. I think that there is also something about I don't know whether it's because of higher education that there's always this constant need for, a curriculum. I mean, to get a curriculum revised
Oh my gosh, months.
I mean, no one wants to do it. It's like, I've
Just
done
to
it. It's really hard
change the
work.
title of a course takes a semester.
Yeah, changing a title of a course needs to be approved by the board of trustees, who don't even know what the subject matter is about,
Crazy.
because that's not even what they're trained in, right?
Yeah, it's really, and that
So
isn't
it's
even
kind
really
of more the
changing the
rubber,
curriculum. Yeah.
right? The rubber stamping process is getting a little bit sort of
Mm-hmm.
ridiculous. I think that you're absolutely right in that, and I would say that the only thing is that higher education does have. I mean, the reason that it hasn't been replaced, in my opinion, so far, is that the boot camps are very actually new to teaching and learning, and there's
Mm-hmm.
actually a lot of it was focused on content. So yes, we're using the right programming languages, we're using the right stack of technology or software or what have you, and that's what the industry is using, and therefore we are moving to it quickly. But I think that what higher education typically are able to provide more is some of the more sort of, like you were saying before, the critical thinking skills and some of those other things
The
that
theoretical under.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's just a little bit harder. So I think that we got to somehow make that bridge a little bit better.
Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right, though. Like for um, if you're in a school of journalism today, and you are not able to at all address the needs for what a current journalist is going to have to need, to need, you're not gonna your students are not going to be able to work.
Mm-hmm.
They need to understand social media, whether it's for good or for the bad.
Right.
They need to understand these things, and the world is changing and changing quickly, and if you don't have a way to do that, I think is really difficult. And I would argue that to be the case for almost all disciplines, really. It's not just
In one
the
way or
ones that
another.
seems
Yeah.
obvious. It really changes very quickly, and that's because the speed of information travels so quickly today that and it's leveled the playing field as well. There's more people being able to invent more things, discover more things, and publish them more often and quicker.
Yes. And by
So
themselves without having to go through any gatekeepers.
right.
Yeah.
So that becomes an even more important. So maybe that's where we should end on, is that higher education really need to go through that same level of critical thinking skills that we think so much about for the students, to decipher fact versus fiction, and decipher what's important and what's the fad, to be able to make those decisions and then speed up that sort of efficiency.
Change
Because the
process.
world's
Yeah.
efficiency has changed a lot. I mean, if NASA is still working at the same speed as they were before, they wouldn't be launching much of anything. They've had to push themselves too, right? I think that we could do it. Well, thanks to people like you, who are always
And to
fighting.
people like you.
Oh, come on. All right. Well, Jennifer, it's wonderful catching up with you. It's actually been a while, so I
Yes,
think
it has.
it's really great to chat with you, and I hope that we get to do this again soon. But if not, I'm sure that I will continue to be talking to folks at SPS. You have just amazing people, and please keep up the good work. And I want to continue to hopefully really stay involved with all these cutting edge things that you do.
Great. It's good talking to you too, Jeff.
All right, take care.
Okay, bye.
Bye. This concludes our conversation. To hear our next episode, be sure to subscribe to Digication Scholars Conversations on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. The Digication Scholars Conversation series is brought to you by Digication, a technology platform powering the most innovative e-portfolio programs in K-12 and higher education. Our website can be found at digication.com. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please like, subscribe, and share with a friend. Thanks for tuning in.